Greetings of peace. My name is Yusuf Ismail, and the program you're watching is I Beg to Differ. This program focuses on interactive debate. It focuses on socio-economic issues, both affecting us as South Africans, and certainly looking, examining, and unpacking some of the global dominant trends in the international community. In law, treason is criminal disloyalty to the state. It is a crime that covers some of the more extreme acts against a nation or the sovereign. When does the government be involved in treason? When does corruption become treason? Well, joining us to discuss this issue is the founder of the anti-treason movement, none other than my good friend and social activist, Rassool Snyman. Rassool, welcome to I Beg to Differ. It's good to have you once again.
Thank you for having me, Yusuf, and greetings to the listeners.
Now, you are a founder of the anti-treason movement. Let me start off with this by saying, firstly, how do you define treason?
The definition of treason is basically a betrayal. In the legal sense, when used by the state, it's when an individual or a collective or a group or even a government betrays the interest of the republic to external parties, or they undermine the democratic principles of the republic, or undermine the republic itself for self-interest and self-enrichment.
Now, treason by its definition has always been conventionally understood as disloyalty to the state, and historically, in common law countries, you had a situation where treason, for example, covered murder of special social superiors, like the murder of a husband by the wife, or, for example, the murder of the master by a servant. And there's been other categories, historically speaking, where attack against the king, treason against the king or the monarch, was viewed as high treason, and treason against a lesser superior was viewed as petty treason. And that's kind of been incorporated. That's something that has been internalized within modern day governments based on the fact that we've inherited this whole notion from a colonial past. Would I be correct?
One has to begin to look at history. Nothing happens in a vacuum. Treason never was introduced yesterday, for example. It has a historical trajectory that goes way back into the mists of time. Treason was generally defined by power. Those in power defined what was treason. Those in power defined and determined what was the punishment for treason.
Which was inevitably death, and still technically is death, even in our present dispensation in South Africa.
Yes, and one has to now say, where has the trajectory gone? Have we reached the end of defining treason, for example? Who defines treason? And who is guilty of treason? And who takes action against treason?
This brings me to another argument and debate, is that we're talking about, as it's understood now, treason against the state. And conventionally, when we talk about state, it's understood in general circles as the government. But that's actually not a definition of what the state really constitutes. How would you define the state?
The state is the central power that locates within the people.
So that's the people. The people are the state.
Well, if you look at, for example, the terminology that's used, by the people, for the people, that encapsulates what is a state, because it's by the people, for themselves. Now, many people take government and see government as being the state, but that is incorrect. Government is an employee of the state,
which is the people.
The people employ government, and they employ government every 5 years. Then they have the right to dismiss them. Now, treason is what happens in between those two periods. Has someone been loyal to the state? Has someone been loyal to the people? Has someone protected the rights of the people? Has someone protected the republic? Has someone protected the interests of the people? Has someone lived their fiduciary responsibilities to the people?
So bringing then, just because we need to go and zero in onto this, as a founder of the anti-treason movement, what's your kind of trajectory? What's your goal? What's your aim and your objective?
If one looks around the world, globally, the governments have usurped the power of the state and begin to represent the state, which is a coup. If I, as an individual, go and usurp the power of the state, they'd call me a dictator, they'd call me a traitor, and they'd call me a usurper. Now, when government does this, when your servant, your elected servant, takes your power, by definition, it's treason.
Are you then basically calling for a more libertarian society, society without borders, or society where there's a kind of a free rule, which is somewhat anarchic in its outlook?
When we look at the terms of rule, or even the definitions of rule, there are so many formats. We are saying that the people will decide how they want to govern themselves.
Okay, so you've now got the anti-treason movement of which you're a founder, and just tell us, you're going to have, I would assume, a meeting or a kind of a Kickstarter galvanizing program within 2 weeks. When is this happening? What's this whole program about?
The idea of talking to the people as the anti-treason movement is that people should become part of the program because it's their program.
So you're having a meeting. The anti-treason movement is having its meeting.
Yes.
Where is this going to happen?
The meeting is on the 24th of August this month, and it's happening in Sherwood.
That's next week, 24th of August.
Yes, and it's happening in Sherwood.
Yes.
The address, I'd check in my notes, and we'll talk about the address
later. We'll talk about the
later.
address later.
But the essence of everything is that the people should take charge of their republic.
What are you hoping to achieve by initiating this forum?
The first thing that happens is that we have to take back our republic. The republic has been stolen from us.
And what are the steps you plan to do and engage upon to take back the republic, in a manner of speaking?
The first point is it's there. The evidence is there. If one goes to, for example, the negotiations, 1994 was not a consultative process. 1994 did not achieve or bring about what the revolutionary struggle preceding 1994 was about.
So let's put it then in its proper perspective. As the founder of the anti-treason movement, what you are suggesting, in implicit terms or explicit terms, depending on how you look at it, is the fact that the present ANC-led South African government is guilty of what you would say constitutes treason. Is that what you are suggesting in the geographical locale of South Africa? Is that what you're suggesting happened?
We have to look at the definition of treason and its application, and then who applied it. 1994 and the events leading up to 1994 were in themselves a conspiracy to commit treason.
By who?
By the ANC and some of its negotiators.
Now, when you talk about the ANC, back then, the chief primary negotiators, people like Nelson Mandela, earlier on, prior to his death, Oliver Tambo, you had newcomers back then like Cyril Ramaphosa, and some of these new individuals, even to some limited extent, Jacob Zuma himself. Are we looking at specifics, or are we looking at the general trajectory that the ANC was following in 1990 after the release of Nelson Mandela?
Well, one cannot say after the release of Nelson Mandela.
There were negotiations prior in Sussex with
secret.
people like Mbeki, secret meetings with members of the Afrikaner elite, the Broederbond in Sussex and Britain and so on. So those negotiations were happening even prior to his release.
I'll use an example of World War II. If the Americans went into negotiations with the Germans, or an individual, or the Democratic Party or the Republic went into negotiations with Germany, when they were at war, what would that be considered? When we looked at our struggle, the revolutionary struggle, where great people died, many lost their lives, blood was spilled, we fought about land.
So what are you saying should have happened? Because certainly the one argument presented is that, and this is a discussion I've had many times with the gentleman mentioned, Ben Turok, and he says that those negotiations were inevitable to lead to what he describes, and this is a general narrative, to a peaceful transition. Without that process, there would have been an anarchic state. The National Party would have held on to power. The ANC were not militarily powerful to revolutionary turn over the National Party, and we would have had a situation where the systematic form of apartheid would have continued.
Yusuf, one has to look at the term neo-colonialism. When you enter into negotiations, the people you are negotiating with don't choose who will negotiate. They won't prescribe what should be negotiated. They won't determine what is non-negotiable. Now, our negotiators who say they negotiated in our name were chosen outside of the people themselves.
Was Nelson Mandela not the inevitable choice?
What made him the choice?
Well, as a person incarcerated purportedly for 27 years, and now being released, a populist leader, people viewed him as the leader. Was he not the correct choice at that time?
The question has to be asked, who decided he is the leader? If it was a democratic dispensation, the people would have decided. Why weren't the people consulted? There were others incarcerated from other groupings. There were people from the PAC, there were people from APLA. And Nelson Mandela never spent 27 years in prison. The longest serving prisoner was a PAC member. So if we're using the criteria of how long someone was incarcerated, then one would look at the PAC.
Well, did he not have the political muster back then and the populist support, which other leaders never possibly had?
Chosen by who? Popular support.
The argument is by the people, by the not just the ANC supporters and not just the electorate, but the general mass of society.
One could say there are two ways that society functions. One is those in power set the narrative and sell it to the masses, and one is the masses respond, set the narrative, and speak to those in power.
The one point then, and just to interrupt you, is that the selection process was incorrect. But secondly, what was the nature and the ambit of the betrayal per se? What would you identify? If you were to core focus, this is where the betrayal lay, what was it?
Well, if one looks at, I can pick on one thing, the land question. If one looks at, for example, De Beers are still taking stones out of our country. Diamonds are going out by the
gold
truckload.
As well.
Gold is going out by the truckload. Our people are still poor.
Saying the wealth of the masses has been monopolized, it's controlled by foreign companies.
The same foreign companies in apartheid. Now, this is where treason becomes obvious, though it wears a fig leaf. And the fig leaf, of course, is peaceful transition. Peaceful transition means what? If you take my cell phone, do I leave you with the cell phone and say that's a peaceful transition?
What should the ANC have done?
The ANC should have consulted the people. Not they. The ANC should have called for a consultation of the people and the negotiators. And the framework of the discussions should have been in place.
Would they not have collapsed inevitably? Because from what I can see, there would have been a deadlock. The one argument would be total nationalization of land, mineral resources, nationalization, for example, of the Reserve Bank, which is nationalization of banks in general, kind of a more socialist aligned policy. That wouldn't have been acceptable, and those holding power, the issue is that foreign investors would have taken out their capital, left, and bled the country dry.
I think that's the dominant narrative, but it's not the only narrative. That wasn't the only thought process. And I think it's an imposition rather than something that emerged from the people. Democracy, by its very nature, means the people must speak. Democracy means that the people must be in control of their own resources. If that is not in place, then the rest becomes an academic exercise. You cannot say, in the interest of peace, let's give my cell phone from one hijacker to another hijacker. What about me? What do we say to the people who are dying daily? Did they agree to die daily? What about the people who are poor? Did they agree to die poor? What about the people who died for total liberation? Did they agree? Did we continue to agree for De Beers to take the mineral wealth out of the country? Did we agree to the Oppenheimers? Did we agree to even joining the Commonwealth, for example? Was there a referendum?
None.
Was it
There
explained
was
to
none
us?
whatsoever.
So there was no consultation process, and if there's no consultation process, you don't have democracy.
Rassool, I just want you to hold that thought, but we have to go for an ad break as I'm informed, and we're going to be back shortly and continue this discussion. With me, the founder of the anti-treason movement, Rassool Snyman. Welcome back. Welcome back to I Beg to Differ. If you just joined us, in discussion and conversation with the founder of the anti-treason movement, Rassool Snyman. They will be having a meeting come the 24th of August in Durban, and we'll give you details of that as we go through the program. Rassool, coming back to the discussion, is that at the same time, speaking about the betrayal, there were other voices that existed. One individual that comes to mind that seemed to have been, as some would argue, conspiratorially removed from the scene, Chris Hani. What happened to Chris Hani?
This again shows the nature of the betrayal, and it also shows the shenanigans and the conspiracies.
Which is not even discussed in the mainstream media, because some topics are taboo.
One has to ask, what has the role of the media been in apartheid? What has the role of the media been in the election or selection of leaders? What was the role of the media in creating the backdrop for what we call the peaceful transition and even the TRC? Has the media covered how many other people were murdered by the ANC in the lead up to 1994?
Are we suggesting that there was murder, there were voices that were eliminated, that were viewed as impediments or bulwarks to the negotiation process?
Colonialism and capital has a history and a litany of crimes.
Do we have evidence for that here?
Well, if the person that is the criminal controls the justice system and prioritizes, then how are we going to get justice? How are we going to get to the truth? So for us, the first point is that we have to remove those who want to be referees and players and find a neutral entity that can investigate this. We should uncover the Chris Hani murder, for example.
It's never been done, because the fait accompli has been that it was the far right that was involved in the assassination. But I've always looked at the issue with some degree of suspicion, in the sense that it was quite crucial that law enforcement officials were there on the scene just immediately after the assassination took place. It's taken for granted that this was done by those on the far right, and people don't look at the roles of individuals like the former defense minister, now late Joe Modise, who some have argued had some particular role to play in the assassination.
Well, if one looks at how government is coming apart, and now it's an argument between thieves, and I go further and say an argument between murderers. Was not Jacob Zuma saying that there is complicity in the murder of Chris Hani? So one is not talking from only outside the ANC.
Within, there are hints basically given by leaders themselves.
Between, internally, as they say, there's no honor amongst thieves. And if one looks at the power and the retention of power, one can see everyone will be sacrificed to keep power. It may have been for a collective at first, because they were all going to share the proceeds. Then as things unraveled and everybody took more than others, and some wanted to hold power, now the battle is within and the secrets are coming out. It's like a married couple, for example. When they argue, all the secrets come out, the dirty linen comes out. Now, we are seeing exactly the same thing at a governmental level. And we are saying, how is it that we, the people, don't know? If we are out of the loop and we were kept deliberately and otherwise ignorant, then obviously there's been a conspiracy, and there's an ongoing conspiracy to keep the people silent and ignorant. And as is said, Emma Goldman says, the most violent element in society is ignorance.
One of the problems we have is that people assume that liberation movements inevitably have a certain ebb and flow, in terms of which there's a trajectory where they reach the moral peak of their particular achievements or goals and objectives, and then there's a subsequent downfall and slide. But there seems to be a more revisionist material that is coming out now, particularly within academic circles, that seems to suggest that at its outset, way back in the 70s, the ANC as a liberation movement had been compromised on a number of levels. It had lost its particular political footing. Members of the Black Consciousness movement had pointed this out, the fact that when it came to morality, that was, or the actual struggle for justice, there were a lot of compromises made on a number of levels, and as it stands, it had initially been compromised way back in the 70s.
If one looks at the history of the ANC from inception, the ANC was not against power. The ANC was against sharing power with the oppressors. I forget the year.
Was it 1910 or John Dube?
When Nelson Mandela, as a young SACP member, and Robert Sobukwe,
that would be in the 50s.
Youth, they were in the Youth League. When they challenged the ANC at that point and made it more militant, because it was complacent, it was liberal. It didn't want to remove oppression, it wanted to jointly oppress the people.
Share power with oppression.
So when we say the ANC is a liberation movement, we've got to look at that carefully and say, since when? When we say the ANC was compromised, we have to ask how and when. Because the fundamental principle of sharing power within an oppressive paradigm was there. So what was the compromise?
It was latent within the organization and the essence and makeup of what the organization stands for.
Exactly. And one has to begin to say, why didn't we know? You know, why didn't we know? Why were we, the people, kept in the dark? And why didn't we have the ability or the right or access to the truth?
Were those within the Black Consciousness movement not aware of this?
Well, those within the Black Consciousness movement
and the Pan-Africanist movement as well,
who raised their voice were killed. I mean, as you speak, there are Pan-Africanists who are still incarcerated. And I ask why? Why would one movement incarcerate another member
They're
of the
still
movement?
incarcerated at this point in
present,
time.
Some are dying in prison. And one begins to ask, was it not a case of eliminating those more friendly to the revolution, more friendly to the people, and those who wanted to locate themselves in achieving the objectives of the struggle? Because a revolution or a struggle has objectives, and the objectives were around the economy, it was around land, not only just the vote, but the economy and land. Those were two critical issues. And today we see the economy and the land has not been touched. We hear mutterings, very nice mutterings, for example, about appropriation without compensation. Why wasn't this done in 1994?
The danger now, however, is that when you talk about expropriation without compensation, the danger now is that land will not be given to the people. There will not be an egalitarian share, but the fact that you'd have this divided amongst cadres and members within the political fraternity and elitists controlling the land, which means that the ANC cannot anymore be trusted, even if they engage in a policy of expropriation without compensation.
Our trust as a people was misplaced, because 1994, again, we had trust, and we trusted that people will negotiate with the interests of the people at heart, not the interests of the party at heart, or interests of a particular elite group within the party. But that never happened. What happened instead was an elite-to-elite agreement to plunder the state. Now, the anti-apartheid movement was to actually resist the plunder of the state, so the wealth of the people could be redistributed amongst the people. And if you go back to the narratives then, it was redistribution of wealth. But what we got was redistribution of poverty. Instead of the people, the oppressed black masses or the oppressed African masses, coming on par with the white masses were brought down to the level of the black masses, and now we find white people at robots begging. So we never had a redistribution of wealth. We had a redistribution of poverty. And if you look at where that wealth went, one begins to look, it's going into for example, the state capture shows you where the wealth is going. Then the agreements were quite startling, and I think the people should have been angry. Cyril Ramaphosa himself was involved in MTN and they moved money offshore. And the investigation is showing that there were some fronting companies. And the money, the trajectory of the money went offshore without paying taxes. Now, how do you build a nation? How do you protect the interests of the people when you take the people's money offshore and you don't tax it? Which means the hospital systems fail, which means people die, which means, again, we don't even have ambulances, which means, on the other hand, the judicial system dies. Then you're sitting with cadre deployment. Now, if you take all of these together, it's not just a case of corruption. It's not just a case of pure business economics. It's a case of undermining democracy. It's a case of impoverishing the people. It's a case of taking away the voice of the people. Therefore, this corruption cannot be seen in isolation, but has to be seen in its proper context and its treatment.
There's two aspects to it, because from 1994 to 1997, we speak about the historical compromise that happened at Codesa in 91 and so on. But within that period of 1994 to 1997, the argument made, and certainly rightfully so, that the ANC was kind of subsumed by the neoliberal narrative and embraced the kind of culture of globalization. That's on one level. But the credibility of the ANC was still held at a particularly high level by the global community. It seems to be that the kind of trajectory went down after 2000 when individuals are found to be engaged in what we would call open criminal activity. Would that be correct? Because there's two levels here. There's a historical compromise, the issue of embracing global capital, that's on one level. And then there's a criminal enterprise to it as well, where there's open fraud, there's thuggery, skullduggery. There's two sides of this debate that we're looking at. And the second aspect basically became more apparent during the arms deal scandal, and of course during the Zuma administration, where basically it reached a trajectory of going the kind of bull opening the gates, in a manner of speaking.
When one looks at this entire scenario, one has to look at the international community itself. Is it above blame? Is it above, for example, partiality? Is it impartial? Truly speaking. Is it complicit? Who is the international community? What has it been doing? And one then has to reach the point where you begin to talk about colonialism, for example. The very same international community that's telling us what we should and shouldn't do and selected our leaders is the very same one that plunders, that is racist in the broadest sense of the word. It's the capitalist monster that is choosing our sub-monsters. Now, at that level, one has to begin to say, who is the enemy? Who was the enemy? Capital was always the enemy. As Khoisan people, we know we were turned into commodities and slaves by the very same capital that we talk about. Now, that capital was the international community. And the international community is racist, as one can see. I mean, for example, there's the Namibian genocide. They're not
of the Herero community.
They're not commenting on it.
Nobody comments on that.
I don't see the outrage. There's the exploitation and brutality in Congo. I don't see the international community talking. So who is this international community? So that has to be the first point that we look at. The second point, we have to look at capital. Has capital been good to us? Has capital been good to everyone? In fact, the world is now saying we need something more than capital. We need something better than capital. And the last meltdown showed us that capital doesn't care about color. Greece is a case in point. Nobody cared about the Greek people. They were all ripped off by capital, and it didn't matter whether they were white or black or yellow or green. So we move capital out of the equation because capital created the ANC. Capital chose the ANC. Capital chose
as its effective representative.
Its proxy.
Proxy as such.
Proxy, it was a proxy. Because the ANC never represented us. Representation means if you were the people and you sent me to negotiate, you would give me the mandate. You would tell me what's negotiable, what isn't negotiable.
But yet your oppressors had basically chose a negotiator and told them on what terms to negotiate.
And killed everyone else that wasn't
That
in
opposed that
agreement.
process. But just hold that. I'm going to stop you there. We're going to go for an ad break. And when we're back, we're going to continue this fascinating discussion. We're going to take it to its logical conclusion. We'll be back shortly. Welcome back to I Beg to Differ. This is Yusuf Ismail, and with me in the studios is the founder of the anti-treason movement, Rassool Snyman. Rassool, before we continue the discussion, the anti-treason movement is holding a meeting on the 24th of August. Where will this be?
This will be in 32 West Riding Road, Sherwood.
That's in Durban.
That's in Durban. If one, for example, goes off the freeway and takes the old freeway, there's a mosque, a Sufi mosque that's next door. We're holding the meeting in the office complex.
Is there a contact detail or an email address which you could put up on the screen for people to get more information on the subject?
Rassool1 at mjvn.co.za.
Is it not .ac.z, .co.za?
.co.za.
We'll put that up. We'll have that put. So it's Rassool1 at mjvn.co.za.
And we'll put up the facilitator.
And
coordinators.
Who is this open for? Is this open for the public?
This belongs to the public.
What time will this be?
This will be at 2 o'clock.
So it will be at 2 o'clock on a 24th of August.
Saturday.
That's a Saturday afternoon. And it's open to the public. I assume refreshments will be provided, and of course, the discussion will obviously ensue. Are you having anyone within the legal fraternity going to be part and parcel of this meeting, or you haven't yet looked at that objective?
We've spoken to a number of legal people. We're hoping to have people like Professor John Devenish and other, like Amal, for example. We hope they'll be there. We've spoken to activists. We're looking at religious people and everyone else, and the common and the ordinary man, because what we believe is there needs to be a democratic process that is inclusive and reflects the voice of the people.
And this meeting basically intends to, at least at the very basic level, create some sort of discourse in terms of what's going on. But are there any initiatives that are going to be taken up from this? Are you looking at some sort of legal framework in terms of which you take on individuals within the government?
Well, what happens is, Yusuf, this meeting is the first of 1,000 steps.
Meant to explore different options.
The options. The principle has been embraced, even internationally. I was on radio yesterday or the day before, and we spoke about this extensively. We spoke with, for example, Africans in other countries. We spoke to people in the Caribbean. We spoke to even Americans who are saying their government is not their government. Their government is not acting in their interests. And for example, when you look at the war economy, the military-industrial complex takes Americans and sends them out to kill Iraqis, but it's not in their interests. The corporations make money. The military-industrial complex makes money. Everyone makes money except the people.
Do you have any problem with, for example, the commission of inquiries that have been set up in terms of the Commission Act? I mean, the Zondo Commission, for example, strangely enough set up by the President Zuma based on, for example, the public protector's findings on different aspects of state capture. Your anti-treason movement is not going to deal with specifically state capture per se. You're going the whole hog. In other words, unpacking state capture, which may be one segment in the cog, over and above other issues, historical compromise, the trajectory that the ruling party has done over the past 24 years. So it's not just simply state capture and corruption that you're going to be focusing on.
State capture and corruption is a manifestation of a disease that started in 1994.
A weak argument, and again to interrupt you, is that this was raised and put to the president. Well, I wouldn't call him the president, but now ex-president Jacob Zuma. His argument was that the state constitutes a number of facets. One, the for example, the judiciary. And his argument is, as a rebuttal to the allegation of state capture, is that are we saying that the judiciary is, for example, captured? Are we saying that parliament is captured? So the whole counter narrative, or the counter argument, purportedly rebutting the allegation of state capture, is that the state comprises many entities. And when we talk about state capture, what aspect, what cog is basically captured?
In essence, one has to go back to 1994, where the capture happened. And the capture wasn't about one arm or the other. The capture was about the system itself.
This takes me then to, this individual, Zuma, his appearance, and I think one thing that we as South Africans can basically agree upon is that he's always been adept at putting on a show. Now, the argument has been is that this has served him well, even since he was ousted in 2018, but more recently his kind of public performance, his repertoire has somewhat diminished. Some have argued that he has basically resorted to these kind of long-standing strategies in order to become more relevant. And so his appearance at the Zondo Commission was part and parcel of a strategy whereby you have an individual that is fighting a battle for political capital, and to maintain support he needs to be more visible. And so there's one faction and one point of view which says that his appearance at the Zondo Commission merely played into the whole idea of wanting to become more politically relevant. The fact that he's in the public sphere, he doesn't care whether his credibility is gone or not. But to stay relevant, he has a canny calculation. That is, he knows he won't change his mind's critic, but to get the supporters' fever, he needs to be in the public eye. Do you see that as a particular strategic initiative by him and his minions and cronies who basically sustain him?
Well, the behavior pattern of Jacob Zuma is no different to the behavior pattern of the ANC.
You described him as just simply the bull that broke open the door.
Yes, the bull.
But not the main element, but just simply the bull.
He was the bull from a particular herd that was diseased. And
rotten to the core.
One rabid bull from a herd of rabid bulls. We are dealing with the disease. We don't care with one bull or another. We're saying, let's put down the herd and let's have a
But the point is that the 10 lost years have been primarily Zuma. That's what everybody's talking about. You're saying that that's wrong. That's not entirely correct. The rot began before his tenure or the commencement of his administration in 2009.
The trunk of the elephant is not the elephant. The elephant started in 1994 and even what preceded 1994. It's only that it became more blatant because Zuma had no finesse. Cyril Ramaphosa is not any better. It's just that he'll have more finesse. He'll do it better and he'll plunder us more.
Are you saying he's as equally corrupt, more on a sophisticated level?
It's only about sophistication.
In what way?
It's packaging.
I understand the Marikana saga with Cyril, the argument that he was a businessman that was compromised in the 1990s, but he left the political sphere.
No, I don't think so. Politics and economics are closely tied. You can see party funding. You can see now rumors are coming out of where did they get their funds. Secondly, he was an architect of what's happening now, an architect. It never played out exactly as he chose, and he became a victim of his own architecture. Corruption, one has to define what's corruption and who is the corruptor and corruptee.
You don't see the Zondo Commission of Inquiry leading to further prosecutions?
The police cannot police themselves. We, as the people, should have decided on the commission, who's the commission, what's its trajectory, and who has oversight.
But I mean, do you see these individuals as compromised? I mean, Deputy Chief Justice Raymond Zondo, the lead of the examining team seems to be somewhat critical in terms, and I think that's what Zuma's legal defense made the telling point, that he had been vilified, that his legal team hadn't been given sufficient time to prepare for the questions he may face. The idea is that this has been an inquisitorial process when dealing with him. Do you not see the Commission of Inquiry as a fair way in terms of dealing with issues of state capture?
I think it's a case of a rogue pleading persecution when the prosecutor questions him and saying, you're not supposed to question me and cross-examine me. Everyone in political life is open to question by us, the people. Now, if someone refutes that, now we have a problem with that person, because that person is not believing in the very institution that he says is a part of the state. Now, when we look at what we say, if we take their argument to its logical conclusion, then we're saying that the different facets of the state are there to serve different purposes. But one could see the facets of the state also get captured. For example, I don't agree with the Shabir Sheikh judgment, that one man goes to jail and another man
stays free. I mean, it takes two to corrupt each other. But stop that thought, Rassool. We're going to go for an ad break, and I'm going to come back shortly. We will see you soon. Welcome back to I Beg to Differ, and we are in our final segment. And if you've joined us or have been watching us for the past half an hour or so, I'm in the studios together with Rassool Snyman, who is the founder of the anti-treason movement, and they will be having or convening a special meeting and forum on the 24th of August at 2 p.m. in Sherwood. So just give us the details again. There will be the meeting of the anti-treason movement on the 24th of August.
On the 24th of August,
Saturday
at 2 p.m.
Where will this be held?
It will be at 32 West Riding Road, Sherwood.
32 West Riding Road, Sherwood. And this is open to the public?
The anti-treason movement itself is non-racial. It's not aligned religiously. It's not aligned politically. So every patriot in the country should come.
Okay. So just one other thing, Rassool. When we're talking about treason, we've spent a lot of time looking at the local political situation within our particular dispensation. Are we talking about other systems, international systems? I mean, I understand the point, this is non-religious, but certainly, and when we talk about communities, and we talk about Muslim communities, I do believe that we should hold ourselves to a higher standard in terms of our worldview. What's a Muslim role in this?
I think Islam locates amongst the people. Islam locates amongst the well-being of the people. Islam locates amongst the people having a say in how they're governed. Islam locates amongst the people determining on their methodology of governance. Now, if one looks at Saud, for example, one then sees the Saud regime is not something that naturally emerged from the people. It's something that was imposed by the British. Now, that, for example, the Sauds are guilty of treason. And those who put them in place are also co-conspirators in that treason, because they interfered in the running of a sovereign nation. They interfered in its politics. And with the end result, they interfered in all the damages that emerged from it.
Well, the other argument is that it was controlled by the Ottomans, a foreign power.
Well, one has to look at, if you look at, for example, theocracy. Theocracy means there's commonality of belief systems, of ideologies, and that unites the people and makes them a kingdom, not necessarily their tribal affiliations or their race. Because you know Islam has Muslims that are Chinese. Islam has Muslims that are African. So, all in all, every Muslim has a right to be in Saudi Arabia, which isn't really Saudi Arabia and shouldn't be Saudi Arabia. It should have been the Hijaz, for example.
Historically, it was referred to as that.
Yes, but what happened? It was usurped and made a kingdom. In Islam, there's no kingdom.
I mean, we just finished the Hajj. I mean, basically, that's been the role of the Hajj essentially at its initial stage. The final pilgrimage was, in fact, revolutionary. We moved away from that aspect because now it's there to sustain the oppressor, an oppressive system.
What is Saudi becoming? Becomes a question. What's it evolving into? And if one draws a parallel between South Africa and Saud, it's the same thing like Ramaphosa. They were the architect of something, and then it went out of their control. The same thing, the British brought this and it went out of the people's control. Why did it go out of their control? Because they were comfortable, because they accepted it. They didn't rise up and object to it. For example, right now, all the dissenters are languishing in jail. There we have the Khashoggi
case
incident where someone was murdered and people are still going to Hajj and it's business as usual.
No significant change, or the incarceration of different scholars, for example, the death penalty imposed upon them.
There were, after Ramadan, there were 3 scholars that were due to be beheaded.
They haven't yet, but the point is
but the
principle behind it.
We are quiet, we'll continue. I mean, it's like seeing someone getting raped at the side of the road and you continue to
Are you saying basically then that when it comes to true justice and morality, even though that is within our own worldview, within the Quranic and prophetic paradigm, that Muslims haven't been too quick to be at the forefront of standing up for justice and truth and morality?
Islam has become a victim of its own success. If you look at, for example, Islam was about quality, a better character, a better living standard, a better moral compass.
This takes me to the next issue, is that why has there been such an acquiescence to power? Because, I mean, I was reading, and I may have brought it to your attention some time back, is that you had these old magazines, Muslim Digest, in the 80s and the 70s and so on. And at the front page, the so-called Ramadan annual, the point of celebratory congratulation would be coming from the architects of apartheid themselves. There would be letters from P.W. Botha. You'd be, for example, meetings between the MJC and the leaders of apartheid. That hasn't changed now because essentially it's just simply acquiescence with another power. Is there some sort of inherent fear that if we stand up to power in whatever its forms and manifestations are, that somehow or the other it will compromise and affect our communities?
Well, if one looks at power, Islam always stood up against power.
But doesn't it call for the divine power culture itself? It appeals to the divine power culture.
Well, if I would rather say it looks at...
sovereignty belongs to God at the end of the day.
I think sovereignty belongs to God, but man is the custodian. Therefore, he has certain obligations, and one of the obligations is to free the slave. Freeing the slave can be interpreted in many ways. Freeing the slave could be freeing the people from an unjust ruler, freeing the people from an unjust system, freeing the people from exploitation even from within themselves. And Quran speaks, I mean, it says, speak truth even against yourself. And when one looks at, for example, the last sermon, that is clear. So I don't see why we are afraid of power. However, what has happened is, and the Prophet, peace be upon him, speaks of this, he says, there'll come a time when we'll love the world and fear death. And now we love the world. We become materialist, in a sense that we now sit and say, even in Hajj has become a materialistically spiritual experience.
Oh, you remove the aspect of spirituality entirely from the experience. Ritualistic and materialistic by and large.
Is gratification spiritual, for example? For many of us, if you went to Hajj, it has one very particular aspect that relates to justice. When you stone the devil. How can you stone a devil in the surround of the Kaaba, but you leave the devil who's in charge of the Kaaba? Or you leave the devilish activities out there. Or someone maybe a kilometer or two is dying in jail or languishing in jail simply because they spoke the truth. You are supposed to have an affinity.
It's the height of cynicism. The height of cynicism
and
entirely.
Hypocrisy. Not only cynicism, it's hypocrisy.
But for some would argue that this is a spiritual exercise that they want to undertake, and so they divorce. I mean, an elderly couple would divorce the kind of political establishment. For them, it's purely a religious exercise for what they believe is a self-centered individual form of spirituality.
If you go back to Quran speaks about taking what's nice and leaving what's hard. And we have taken what's nice and left what's hard. We've got to take it all, the hard, the soft, the nice. And for many of us, we have been selective in interpreting Islam. We have taken it and changed it into another creature. And the Prophet, peace be upon him, says that soon the religion will leave us.
It will come back like a strange thing, a strange phenomenon.
Strange. Why? Because those who come back will speak truth in a world that has now been accustomed to deceit. Saudi Arabia is the height of deceit, and the devil is a liar.
So, coming back, the final segment is that this is going to be on the 24th of August. Just tell us what's the outcomes? What's the immediate outcomes? Do you have immediate outcomes for this program on the 24th of August?
One has to look at our program. The first point is, let's get together. Let's talk. Let's see what we can do. We are all in agreement. We see the sins out there or the crimes out there. We see the violence. We see the poverty. We see the shack settlements. We read the newspaper on the amounts of money leaving the country. We see the corruption of the politicians. The fundamental question is, what do we do about it? That's in the final analysis. And so we are calling this meeting to say, what do we do about this? From that meeting will come how we do it. For example, there are several options. The one option is to criminalize corruption, number one. Number two, if it's deemed necessary, we can call a referendum. We, the people, should call a referendum. Number three, if it's deemed necessary, we can suspend government. Number four, we can put in place a caretaker government. Number five, we put in place structures that ensure that corrupt people don't come into parliament. For example, right now we have people with dubious records who are going to be our ministers. And we are asking, why are we allowing this? Were we consulted as to whether we want criminals in parliament, whether we want to be governed by criminals? Did someone ask us? So
these are a number of issues that you'll be looking at.
We're looking at those issues. We're saying, what criteria should be in place for someone to become a minister or even a government official? You know, what criteria is there for, let's say, a president? What criteria is there to measure what a president does? He doesn't just come there, plunders the coffers and we leave him. And then what measures and powers do we have as the citizen of a republic to remove the president if necessary?
Well, Rassool, I want to thank you for that. We hope you well on the mission. We hope more people, in fact, join this particular anti-treason movement. It's on the 24th of August. That's at 2 p.m. And the email address, which you'd be putting on the screen, is rassool1@mjvn.co.za, together with a number that accompanies that. And you've been watching I Beg to Differ. We hope to have you next week to join us as we engage in more interactive discussion and debate on other issues. Till then, Assalamu alaikum, greetings of peace, and if you're traveling, have a safe journey home.